Welcome back to the Stigma Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Hayes, and today's guest is somewhat of a unicorn, both literally and figuratively. Her name is April Koh. She's the co-founder and CEO of Spring Health. Spring Health is an industry leader and pioneer in the mental health startup space. They have raised $300 million of capital to date, and April and her team are truly pioneers in the space. Their last round valuation, as reported in the press, was $2 billion just a couple of months ago. And April is the youngest female CEO to found and lead a unicorn startup. She's truly amazing. I'm very excited to share my conversation with her, with you all, just so you're a little more educated on what Spring Health does. They offer what they call a precision mental health care solution for companies that matches companies' employees with the most effective mental health care for them. These solutions include things like mindfulness, meditation, care navigation, coaching, therapy, medication management, and much more. I am extremely excited to share this conversation that I got to have with April with you all. So without any further ado, let's get into it. April, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to come be with us and be on the podcast.
Oh, Stephen, thank you so much for having me.
So I wanted to start by having you share a little bit about your personal story, bio, background. Really, how did you find your way from what you've done in the past to building a very successful mental health startup?
Yeah, so I started the company at Yale, but I had actually dropped out of school to start another company for a few years. And before that, I struggled pretty severely with my mental health for over a decade. So high school and college, it was very much kind of like marked by my mental health journey. And I also had a roommate at Yale who struggled even more severely. She had an eating disorder, and unfortunately, I saw her cycle through multiple treatments and multiple providers for that. And so it just felt like mental health issues were all around me. And, I dropped out of school to start my first company. And that's when my mental health actually started to improve. And it's just kind of ironic that I threw myself into potentially the most stressful role of starting a company and my mental health started to improve. And I think that kind of says a lot about kind of who I am. But it was in LA for that startup, moved up to San Francisco, and then went back to school. Actually, that company was acqui-hired ultimately. And so I had 1 year left for my bachelor's. And so I kind of went back to school thinking, okay, I don't really care about my grades. I don't really care about school. I just care about starting another company. And I knew at that point that I wanted to work on something that would positively change the world. And the only thing that I cared about that much, and the only thing that I really wanted to dedicate my life to, was improving mental health care, just given my journey. So that was 5 years ago. I specifically wanted to eliminate this guessing game that existed in mental health care and that exists in mental health care for so many people. When we started the company, there was a lot of innovation already happening. There were so many new digital mental health solutions emerging, but it was only exacerbating this problem that people don't know which resource, which app, which solution, which treatment, which provider is the right one for them. And I went through that myself. And so I wanted to build a solution that not only gave faster access to care for people, but also allowed people to get access to the right care for them specifically. And so I partnered with, the world's leading computational psychiatrist, Dr. Adam Chekut, who's my wonderful co-founder. And he had proven out that we could use machine learning to outperform the average psychiatrist in matching someone to the right treatment for them. I was blown away by the research. I read his paper and I just reached out cold. We have the email thread where I'm like asking him to meet, and he's like, why do you want to meet me? And it's just kind of like, your typical cold coffee, but, he agreed to meet with me. And then that's how we got together.
So you obviously come from this incredible entrepreneurial background, and you were able to recruit somebody from the sort of science side of our space to be your co-founder. How did you convince him to take the leap into startup land and join you here?
Yeah, well, first off, I was just incredibly lucky. Adam is brilliant. He's one of the smartest, if not the smartest person I know. And he was an incredibly successful scientist, like not just kind of your average PhD, but he set the record for the fastest PhD in the psychology department at Yale, I believe. So he finished in 3 years. He was widely published by the time he graduated. So he had published over 30 peer-reviewed papers in the world's top medical journals. And he had won a lot of accolades for his work. And so just incredibly lucky to have crossed paths with him and read his research and gotten to know him. I convinced him, I think, by showing him very quickly that I could translate his research into something that could have a real impact on real lives. So I majored in sociology and computer science at Yale. And so I was technical. I knew how to hack together products very quickly. And he at the time had an algorithm that could match people to the right antidepressant for them. And so I created a website essentially that hosted his algorithm, allowed people to take a questionnaire, very similar kind of in structure to the Spring Health solution today. And it would spit out essentially what medication at what dosage would be most effective for that person. And he saw that and he saw how quickly we made that. There was a third co-founder actually at the time, and we both of us were kind of hacking away at it. And we turned it around in like a week. And he was so impressed by that. I think he just kind of rode the wave of like curiosity, and we were just building things so quickly, and one thing led to another, and we started the company together.
What was the path from there to really where you are now? What was the path from I hacked together this quick solution using your algorithm or using your IP, and then from there to now we have this $2 billion massive unicorn startup? That question's probably better served for a longer format than a 30-minute podcast, but I had to ask it.
Yeah. Well, first off, it's really surreal when you put it like that. It feels like just yesterday that we were getting together in like literally the dorm rooms of Yale University, and but yet it feels so far away at the same time. So we very quickly knew that we had a very different vision around mental health care than anyone else that we were seeing in this space. So it went back to, let's go beyond faster access to faster recovery, because everyone else is tackling faster access. And we believe faster access to care is table stakes. So let's help people not only get access to care, but let's help them get access to the right care for them. And so that really kind of focused our energy around building an infrastructure or a system that would allow us to collect a lot of high quality data very quickly, that would enable this kind of machine learning vision and this precision mental health care vision that we had. And so we realized, okay, in order to collect this high quality data, we needed to own the care delivery system. So we needed to own the provider network ourselves to have a higher degree of control over the data that we could collect from patients and providers. And so we built this full stack solution. And then, very naturally, the next question was, what customer would purchase this kind of solution? And at the time, we were very, very passionate about eliminating the financial barrier to mental health for people. And so we really like the idea of having a plan sponsor the care that would be delivered by Spring Health and not putting the burden of payment onto the consumer. And so we very proactively looked for a B2B go-to-market. And at the time, employers were just starting to really pay attention to employee mental health. And it was starting to become, massively destigmatized in workplaces. And so, we had very early success with some amazing employers, and then kind of employers would tell other employers about how amazing Spring Health is. And it just kind of took off from there. And the past 3 years has just been this whirlwind of crazy growth for us as a company.
You mentioned this concept of precision mental health care. Can you elaborate on what that means?
Yeah. So precision medicine is kind of the broader field of research around generally using genomic data to pinpoint, what therapeutic would work for someone. But, within precision psychiatry, or the application of precision medicine to psychiatry, genomics hasn't really taken off, and it hasn't been very proven in this space, but rather using, behavioral self-reportable data points that you could collect through a digital questionnaire, for example. These types of data points have been proven to be most predictive of behavioral health outcomes. And so, that's the approach that we take today. We use, a self-report questionnaire data to essentially pinpoint what will work for someone, whether that's, mindfulness or therapy or coaching or specific antidepressant or something else. That whole kind of concept of using data to get a lot more accurate around what will actually work for you. That's what we call precision mental health care.
Got it. And you had mentioned this idea around going to corporations and some destigmatization that's occurred. Can you talk a little bit about what it's like to go to a large corporation and get them to say yes to you? Are you overcoming stigma? Are you trying to show them return on investment? What's the thing that stands between corporations saying yes to something that seems kind of obvious to me, but that's because I spend all day thinking about it? What's the hurdle you have to overcome? And is it stigma related?
So I think that, there are a lot of macro trends that are happening in our favor. So every single year, it feels like the market or the customer mindset changes pretty dramatically, and the market is changing pretty dramatically. But I would kind of describe it in phases. Like 3 years ago, when we first started selling to employers, I would say the driving force behind purchasing something like Spring Health, when it was still very early, was that employees were asking for it. So employers were kind of like responding to the demands of their employees, especially their younger employees. So when I talk about this, mass destigmatization movement, I'm talking like pre-pandemic, mostly about, the younger workforce that feels a lot less of the stigma around their mental health issues. They tweet about their issues. They're a lot more open about their issues. And so they were going to HR and kind of demanding better services around their mental health. And that was really kind of what was motivating a lot of the early employers in purchasing something like Spring Health or Spring Health. So that was like 3 years ago. And then I would say, COVID changed everything. And like 2 years ago, we started to see like COVID make mental health a lot more urgent and a lot more top of mind for not just HR leaders, but for C-suites and for CEOs. And so we were getting some of that momentum, but also we were starting to see employers kind of peer pressuring each other to purchase better mental health support for their employees. So, benefits are used as a way to compete for talent in this war for talent. And as really forward-thinking employers were starting to invest more heavily into employee mental health, all these employers were kind of being pressured to follow suit. And so we saw a lot of like peer pressure and kind of more groupthink happening. And I would say that we're in that phase right now where COVID has made mental health an urgent crisis. It's very much top of mind. People are super burned out. People are leaving their companies. And also C-suites are thinking about it. And so, and employers are kind of like peer pressuring each other into buying these very necessary solutions for employees. So that's where we're at today. I would say in the future, where I see the market going is that I think that it's going to be less of peer pressure or COVID related thing. And I think it's going to be a lot more around delivering ROI, both soft ROI in delivering cultural ROI and showing employees that you care about them and their mental health, but also in hard ROI. So I think employers and corporations are going to start looking at their mental health benefits as a means to curb costs and contain costs in their healthcare across the board as we start to prove out that Spring Health can reduce overall healthcare spend by reducing how expensive someone with a comorbid condition is to that plan. So yeah, I see that the market is changing pretty dramatically year over year. But in the beginning, I think it was mostly this destigmatization that was happening. Now it's kind of everyone's doing it and everyone's bought into it. And in the future, it's going to be ROI driven.
Yeah, I can see that. And I agree with that. And I see a lot of that in the broader market as well. You had mentioned, we had talked a little bit about how you sell to corporations and what they're looking for, why they love what you're doing. I should ask a rather basic question, which is when a company purchases from Spring Health, what is it that you're delivering to them sort of at the beginning of that relationship? What does that look like for them?
Yeah. So maybe I can step back and share how it works. So, say PepsiCo signs on. PepsiCo is one of our customers, and an employee may say it's like a truck driver. Maybe they hear about it through another colleague, or maybe they get an email about it, or maybe they get a home mailer about Spring Health. We have a variety of ways that we market to employees. But say that employee signs up, they sign up, and then they take a comprehensive assessment. And it's a dynamic assessment, so it changes according to your responses. We have the most comprehensive mental health assessment in this space. So we're not just screening for things like stress or depression or anxiety. We're also screening for things like PTSD, ADHD, eating disorders, substance use disorders, really the full gamut of what someone might be struggling with. And then from that assessment, we create a personalized care plan. So it's made specifically for them. It's laid out kind of sequentially. So each person is able to understand, their first step, the step after that, and so forth. They're also paired with a care navigator. This is like a guide, a clinician, in fact, and they work hand in hand with that person. It's the same guide through the entire journey. And that care navigator is responsible for making sure that member is getting what they need. And so, once they're paired with that guide, then we give the member seamless access to whatever it is we recommend. So it might be coaching, it might be therapy, it might be medication, it might be a psychiatrist, it might be something else. So we deliver seamless access to that. And then we actually track their progress over time. And so, that experience of helping each person understand what they're struggling with and what would benefit them, and giving them seamless, fast access to that thing, that is essentially what we deliver for employers today.
And how do you see that vision evolving over time? You talked about how you see the market evolving, and I couldn't agree with you anymore. How do you see what you do now evolving into that changing, growing market over time?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I would say, the first phase of digital mental health was all around access. And I mentioned to you, like, we saw that 5 years ago, and we wanted to, push the market to think beyond faster access to faster recovery. And we believe that faster access is table stakes. And so we started to push people to think about, how do you personalize care, not just into kind of broad categories of placing someone into coaching versus psychiatry, but really, how do we push the field and the space to getting way more precise and way more granular about the personalization. So that was like the trend that we kind of introduced. Now we are at the cutting edge of delivering faster outcomes and really showing and validating the efficacy of our solution. So we have a study that's under peer review right now that shows that we deliver best-in-class, world-class recovery rates, so comparable to some of our closest competitors. But the big difference between us and our competitors is that we deliver the world-class recovery rates in half the number of sessions and in half the time. And that is incredibly significant, not just clinically and not just for the member who suffers less, but also for systems or health plans that save a lot more money because they're getting their members better in half the number of sessions and in half the time. And they're not having to spend so much on each employee's mental health care to get them better. So it's things like that where it's like, now we're starting to not only deliver faster access to whatever will work for someone, but really prove out those outcomes and show systems and show employers and show health plans that we can deliver, hard ROI for them. That's kind of like the next wave, and that's the next phase. And we're really leading the way there.
It's such an incredible vision. It's powerful. And I'm kind of curious, in the early days of raising money, I know now you've raised $300 million or more, incredible valuation. The company's growing. I think you're the youngest female unicorn founder ever. It's incredible, right? What was it like trying to communicate that vision or that path? What you saw could happen in the early days of trying to raise seed, Series A, the first money in. How hard was it to convince investors 5 years ago that this is what the reality would be?
Oh, that's such a good question. Well, it was a lot harder for a few reasons. Like, one, I was not proven at all. I was like this 24-year-old recent college grad that like really had no meaningful experience under her belt. And, I was trying to convince investors to invest in me. So it was hard because of that. And there's a lot of data to show that, women have a harder time fundraising, and investors ask them different questions, and they judge men on their potential, whereas they judge women on their experience. And so, it was hard because of that. But also I would say, it was a fundamentally different world. Like, obviously the pandemic has changed everything. And I would say but I also think that the first 2 years or first 3 years of us being in existence, even before the pandemic, there was a massive shift in how venture capitalists were thinking about mental health or how employers were thinking about mental health. So very early on, I would say we were still very early. And I would say, we had a lot of foresight and we were very early. And so we had to do a lot of convincing back then. Whereas now the business obviously has so many proof points and we've grown so quickly. And so we have the metrics to make any investor really attracted to the business. But I would also say there's this added halo effect of the industry that we're in and just the general tailwinds that mental health is benefiting from that really made this fundraise process a lot different from the early days.
What advice would you have for an aspiring founder in this space? And, one that maybe comes from a place of not having experience, or maybe a clinician that has a lot of scientific knowledge, but has never built a business before or a scalable business before. What do you know now about building a business 5 years in that you wish that you had known that you'd like to, offer as advice to aspiring entrepreneurs coming in this space?
Well, I think number one, I think you can always do way more than you think that you can do. I know that's a little cheesy, but starting out, I can't, if you had told me when I started out that I would be leading this $2 billion company, I probably wouldn't have believed it. I think that you can do a lot more than you think. And it's just about, getting started and daring to take the leap. So it's kind of cheesy, but it's so true. But the second thing is related, which is that you have to be ready for days that will have an impact on your mental health. We're all very passionate about mental health. The great irony is that a lot of founders are putting their own mental health at risk in trying to make progress in mental health for others. And I certainly experienced that. There were absolutely dark days in the past 5 years where I had serious doubts about myself, about the company. And, you have to prepare yourself for that. I would say, if you're like me and your mental health generally tends to benefit from throwing yourself into something that you're incredibly passionate about, and if you like to work really hard at really complex, challenging problems and your mental health thrives from it, I think then probably the life of entrepreneurship is for you, but it's absolutely not for everybody. So maybe that's another piece of advice that I'd offer up. And then finally, I think I learned to speak the language of impact plus revenue, or impact plus economics in a fluid way, too late. I always kind of speak about both in the same sentence. And it's really easy to kind of lose your way by leaning into either of those too much and forgetting about the other. So, I call Spring Health a double bottom line business. We care very deeply about the impact, the positive impact that we're having on millions of lives. And we also care very deeply about being a solid business, a sustainable business that will be here for years and decades to come. And I would sometimes talk about one, but not the other. I think the really difficult thing to do and the magical thing to do as a leader of a mental health company is to be able to speak about both in the same sentence and in harmony at all times. I know that's super abstract, and I could probably explain it a little bit better, but yeah, it's really important to be able to speak fluidly to your goals around impact as well as revenue and to talk about them together.
How does that translate down into operating the business? Because at times you're probably pushing for a metric for performance, but at times you're also probably pushing for impact. So how does that translate from that abstract concept, which I think, I could not agree with more. How does that translate down into day-to-day operations of the business?
Yeah, I would say it's two things. One is it's in how you speak. So when I address the entire company, I'm always kind of combining those things in the same breath. And I didn't used to do that. So It's like when you're addressing the entire company, whenever you have a company-wide email, whenever you have a company-wide Slack, just talking about both the business opportunity and the impact opportunity in the same breath. I'm very mindful of doing that because, harmonizing those two things is the best way to reflect what we do as a company, which is a lucrative business that is a very strong business, but we also have a tremendous impact on people's lives, and those things go hand in hand. So, speaking about those things in the same breath is the first thing in company-wide communications. And then the second piece is like setting metrics that really harmonize those two things. So, we have a North Star metric at Spring Health, and without going into too much detail around it, it basically allows us to track both the revenue impact of what we're doing, as well as like the social impact and the mental health impact of whatever we're doing. And there's one composite metric that harmonizes those two things. And we, elevate this metric as the most important metric in the company. And I think in doing so, people understand, okay, these two things, impact and revenue, they work hand in hand together.
Was that metric always the North Star? Or how did you land on that metric? I know you probably don't want to share it specifically, I'm imagining you stumbled upon it at some point. Is that right?
What's interesting is, stumbled upon is a really interesting way to put it, because I think it became very naturally like the metric that made the most sense for us at the time to track. And it was recent. So it wasn't like, 5 years ago, we were like, this is our North Star metric and this is what we're driving towards. Like, it very much was like, for about 4 years of our existence, we knew what we wanted to do, but we didn't really have an exact kind of metric to kind of like elevate as our North Star metric. And then about a year ago, it just became very obvious to us. So
there's some really great founder stuff in everything you've just said about not having it figured out from the very beginning, and about just getting out and doing it and being ready to do hard things and choosing to do hard things. There's just so much there. It's so incredible to hear you talk and give that advice to founders. I'm just really grateful that you take the time to do that. Question for you, based on what you've learned and how you've found your way in the space, where do you think the white space for aspiring entrepreneurs in the mental health space is? You've seen this industry for 5 years. You've built an incredible business in it. There's got to be one or two things where you're like, man, if I just could go do anything, I would go do that, knowing what I know now. Where are those greenfield opportunities for people who want to build in this space?
Ooh, that's such a good question. I mean, something immediately comes to mind, which is the proliferation of mental health solutions is not slowing down. I thought that it would, and I thought that there would be like a very clear kind of movement towards consolidation. And I thought there would be, many more kind of M&A transactions that would happen in the space. And, I think Ginger plus Headspace is really interesting. And, there are a few other combinations that have happened, but I thought there would be way more. I think the reality is that proliferation is going to keep happening. And what that means is that there's going to be so many different solutions that do different things across the mental health spectrum. And I think the white space is in finding a way to kind of bring all these kind of solutions together in some way. We're trying to do this at Spring Health to some degree. Like, our mission is around personalization, and our mission is to get each person in front of whatever will work for them, whether we own that solution or not. And so, I do think that there's kind of like an API or a platform play that needs to exist and that the entire space would benefit from. And so maybe that's one area that I would point to. I would also say there's like a tremendous amount of opportunity and excitement around psychedelics. Ketamine was discovered at Yale for its ability to reduce symptoms of depression. And so, psychedelics are very near and dear to me as a Yale grad, and also just personally through personal experience. And so I think that there's a lot of white space there that's untapped.
We've invested a lot in that space, so I could not possibly agree with you more, but I'm very biased. So it is what it is. Is there a way in the future for psychedelic treatments to be a part of what Spring Health is doing, or is there a partnership opportunity in that space for you maybe down the road?
Absolutely. I mean, for us, our North Star, like philosophically, is to get people in front of whatever will work for them and whatever is proven to work for that type of person. So for us, we lean very much into evidence-based modalities. And so as long as there's evidence behind the modality and behind the treatment, we are absolutely opening to incorporating it into our platform.
That's incredible. That will be fun to watch. And I think there'll be some really, really cool things that can happen there. Absolutely, which is probably for another conversation. I think a lot of entrepreneurs view you as a leader in this space, and they probably have ideas about how they, building their seed stage or Series A early stage startup, how they could partner with you to go to market. Is that something you're open to? And if so, what's the right way for entrepreneurs to approach you and try to find ways to collaborate?
Great question. Yeah, we are interested absolutely in partnering with the ecosystem. I think there are so many amazing things happening in the space, and we have access to now millions of lives, and we have the opportunity to bring, some of the best solutions to these millions of lives. And so, what we are interested in partnering with companies that will either allow us to better serve a part of the mental health spectrum in some way, so maybe like a point solution. And we're also interested in partnering with entities that will give us greater distribution and greater exposure to more lives. And so if you fall into either of those buckets, I would absolutely be happy to chat. You can find me on LinkedIn or Twitter, whatever floats your boat, and you can DM me and we'll take it from there.
So as we wrap up here, you've accomplished so much. There's so much to be proud of. There's so much to be thankful for. I know our industry and I and a lot of others are grateful for you being such a pioneer. What is it about what you've done so far that you are the most proud of?
I'm super proud of two things. One is we have never deviated from our insistence on evidence and science. And I think that's something that very much distinguishes us and differentiates us from the rest. And I'm very proud of that. And we have more research and science that is coming out soon. So keep your eye out for that. And then the second thing that I'm really proud of and excited by is our company. And, for us or for me, building a great place to work where people are thriving, feel fulfilled and have great mental health. That for me is not a means to an end. It's an end to itself. And I'm really proud of the amazing culture that we've built at Spring Health. Every single person is so passionate about our mission, is so passionate about eliminating every barrier to mental health. You could feel it in the air or, on Zoom or wherever it is we're collaborating these days. And, it's a really special company. And I think we're one of the only mental health companies based in New York. So if you're ever interested in exploring more, or if you want to join us in helping us eliminate every barrier to mental health, please feel free to reach out.
Well, I'm sure that a lot of people will. And I just wanted to say thank you for taking this time. Thank you for building in this space. I mean, what you've accomplished, the level of execution operationally, the vision you have, everything you've brought to this space has benefited it broadly. And we who come behind you in this space are grateful for you being such a pioneer. So thank you for doing what you're doing. And thank you also for coming and chatting with us and being on the podcast. It's been a lot of fun to chat with you.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for having me.
Thank you again, April, for being here today and sharing with us. It's really incredible to see what you're building, and I'm excited to see where Spring Health goes in the future. To the founders and our listeners out there, there's a number of ways that you can get in touch with April. I'll link to those in the show notes. To our listeners, thank you for being here. And please, if you like this content, this episode, please give us a subscribe or a like or a review on your podcast platform of choice. And more importantly, we'd really love to have you share this episode with a friend. To the founders out there, don't forget to join the Mental Health Startup Slack community, which you can find a link to in the show notes. You can also check out the What If Fellowship program, which is an 8-week accelerator that we run out of What If Ventures to help mental health and digital health startups broadly validate their ideas, perfect their business plan, and prepare to pitch to investors. You can learn more about that in the show notes, as I mentioned, or on the fellowship tab of the What If Ventures website. We definitely want to hear from our listeners, so please do comment on social media. Let us know what you liked, what you want to hear more of, what you disagreed with. You can reach out to us on Twitter at StigmaCast. You can find us on Instagram at Stigma Podcast. You can email us info@stigmapodcast.com, and you can find us on our website at stigmapodcast.com. Thank you again for being here, and until next time, stay safe, be well, and thank you so much for your support.